In a quiet mill town buried under northern Idaho snow, a veteran followed a trail no one else noticed. At the edge of the frozen woods, he found a white German shepherd mother, shielding 8 pure white puppies with the last of her strength. To some people, she looked too wild, too watchful, too much like a danger that needed to be removed. But Everett saw something different in her eyes. Not a threat, but a mother who had refused to give up. When the town demanded answers, he made a promise that would test his patience, his courage, and his lonely life. And before the snow melted, the dog they feared would notice what every human had missed. Share your own touching story with an animal you love. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. The old mill town sat low in the valley like something winter had decided to keep. By late afternoon, the roofs of Cedar Lark were already silvered with snow. The sawmill stacks no longer breathed the way they had when the town was young, but the smell of cut pine still clung to the air around the yards, the storage sheds, and the long rows of stacked lumber beside the service road. Beyond the last houses, the land lifted into dark timber and pale slopes, where old logging trails disappeared beneath fresh powder, and the mountains rose blue against the fading sky. Everett Calder Voss knew those trails better than most men knew their own hallways. At 57, he still moved with the controlled strength of someone who had spent much of his life carrying weight through difficult country. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a solid frame that winter coats could not soften. His face had the long, weather-cut lines of a man who had learned not to waste expression. A slightly crooked nose broke the symmetry of his features, and the gray-green eyes beneath his wind-tangled brown and silver hair seemed to measure distance before they measured people. He had once been an army medic. That was what people in Cedar Lark said when they needed a simple way to explain him. They said it the way they said other things about men who lived alone. He had served. He had come home. He kept to himself. He helped when called. He did not stay long after. All of that was true, but none of it was complete. Everett lived in a cabin north of town, where the road narrowed between lodgepole pines and the snowbanks, rose higher than the split-rail fence. After leaving the service, he had tried more than once to become the sort of man who could sit in a diner, answer questions, laugh at the right time, and let other people fill a room without searching for the nearest exit. It had never lasted. Silence suited him better, or at least it asked less of him, so he took work that did not require much talking. During winter, he volunteered with the County Trail Watch, checking shelter cabins, warning signs, old footbridges, and the narrow routes where tourists sometimes trusted phone maps more than weather. He carried a radio, a compact medical kit, a coil of rope, emergency blankets, and a battered metal flashlight with 2 dents along its side. Before stepping into any uncertain place, he had a habit of tapping that flashlight twice against his palm. It was not superstition. He told himself that every time. That afternoon, he was making his last loop above the North Timberline Road. Snow was falling lightly, not enough to blind him, just enough to soften the edges of the world. His dark waxed canvas coat rasped against the shoulder strap of his pack. A red wool lining showed at his collar whenever the wind lifted it. His boots broke through the top crust with a steady, patient sound. The county had asked him to check an old warming cabin near Harrow Creek, then mark 2 trail signs that had been half buried after the previous night's wind. He had done both. The cabin was empty. The stove inside was cold. No sleeping bags. No tracks. No sign that anyone had taken shelter there and wandered off. He had noted it all in the small, waterproof logbook he kept in his coat pocket. The sensible thing was to head back before the light faded. Everett stood at the bend in the trail and looked down toward the valley. Cedar Lark's windows had begun to glow through the snowfall. From this distance, the town seemed gentler than it was. No unpaid bills, no closed mill wings, no men limping through the grocery store because old work injuries had settled into their bones, no widows heating soup for houses that had grown too quiet. From far enough away, every place looked almost healed. He turned toward his sled. It was a low rescue sled, narrow enough for timber trails, with a pull harness clipped to the front and folded blankets strapped across the base. He rarely needed it, but he had learned long ago that equipment became important only after a man decided not to bring it. That was when he saw the tracks. At first, they looked like a smudged crossing near a low stand of young firs. Everett stopped, lowered his gaze, and crouched. The snow held several prints, partly filled by fresh powder. One set was larger, long-toed, pressed deeper on one side, as though the animal had favored a leg. Around it were smaller marks, many of them, clustered and wandering, some sliding where tiny paws had lost traction. Everett's first thought was wolf. Not a full pack. The pattern was wrong. The smaller tracks were too unsteady, too close together. The larger animal had not ranged ahead and circled back. It had moved slowly, stopping often, allowing the little ones to bunch near it. He pulled off one glove and touched the edge of a print. The packed snow was not frozen, hard, recent. The wind shifted. Somewhere beyond the firs came a sound so thin he nearly dismissed it as branch rub. He stayed still. The forest settled around him, full of small winter noises. The tick of snow dropping from needles, the hush of wind along the ridge, the distant creak of a burdened tree. Then the sound came again, a weak, broken whine. Everett rose carefully. He did not call out. Men who filled silence too quickly often missed what it was trying to tell them. He lifted the radio from his shoulder, but did not speak into it yet. Instead, he tapped the flashlight twice against his palm, switched it on, and stepped off the trail. The trees thickened after 20 yards. Snow gathered in the hollows, and the ground dipped toward a shallow rock cut where spring runoff usually moved beneath the ice. The tracks led there, slipping between exposed roots and a fallen screen of dead branches. The smell reached him before the sight did. Wet fur, cold earth, milk gone sour in the air. Fear Everett slowed. Below a shelf of stone, half hidden beneath overhanging pine limbs, something white moved against the snow. Not the gray-white of a wild animal blending into timber shadow, but a cleaner white, startling even in winter. A dog lifted its head. For a moment, Everett did not move at all. She was a German shepherd, or close enough that the shape of her ears, shoulders, and long back said so before doubt entered. But there was something about her that would have made frightened people choose another word. Her legs were long. Her chest was narrow beneath the wet thickness of her coat. Her muzzle tapered sharply, and her pale amber eyes caught the fading light with an almost wild brightness. Snow clung to the fur around her neck like a rough mane. 8 puppies were pressed against her. They were white, every one of them, small bodies tucked into the hollow between her ribs and the stone. Some squirmed weakly. One nosed blindly at her belly. Another had slid partly away and lay with its head resting on a fold of frozen grass. Their paws were too large for them, their ears soft, their tiny black noses stark against the white fur. The mother dog drew her lips back and gave a low warning. Everett stopped immediately. "Easy," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended, so he lowered it. "Easy now. I see them." The dog did not rise. At first he thought that was because she had chosen not to. Then he saw the angle of her left hind leg and the tremor traveling through her flank. She was not staying down to appear calm. She could barely get up. Her body had been placed between the puppies and the open wind, but the effort had cost her. Her fur was wet along one side. Her breathing was shallow. Still, when Everett shifted his weight, she pushed her head forward and warned him again. Not a threat, a boundary. He had seen that look before, though not always in animals. Men on stretchers had looked at him that way when they were still trying to protect someone beside them. People with nothing left had looked at him, as if their bodies could remain walls after strength had gone. Everett slowly lowered himself to one knee. The mother dog's eyes followed every movement. "I'm not here to take them from you," he said. The words sounded foolish in the cold. She could not understand the promise. Not the way a person could. But tone mattered. Distance mattered. Hands mattered most of all. He placed his gloves on the snow in front of him, palms up, empty. The dog's nostrils moved. One puppy gave a small cry and rooted against her belly. The mother tried to turn toward it, but pain caught her halfway through the motion. Her jaw tightened. She did not yelp. That restraint struck Everett harder than a louder sound would have. He took the radio from his shoulder. "County, this is Voss on North Timberline above Harrow Creek," he said. "I've located an animal emergency. One adult shepherd-type female. Injured with 8 young pups. I need animal support and a snow route check." Static answered first. Then the dispatcher came through, thinned by weather. "Copy, Voss. Can you repeat location?" He gave the coordinates from his handheld unit and looked back toward the trail. The sky had darkened more quickly than he liked. The dispatcher returned after a pause. "Be advised, Animal Control can't reach that road yet. Plow is delayed below Mill Spur. Earliest access unknown. Do you have visual on the animal's condition?" Everett looked at the mother dog. She was still staring at him. Her eyes did not beg. That made it worse. Injured hind leg. Weak. "Pups are cold. I don't think they have until morning." Another pause. "Are you able to hold position?" He almost answered yes. Holding position was clean. Waiting for proper support was clean. A report would show that he had located the animals, requested help, and remained on site. Nobody could fault him for caution. Nobody could ask why a man alone in failing light had tried to move a defensive mother dog and 8 puppies through snow. The smallest puppy cried again. The mother lowered her head toward it. Her muzzle touched its back, nudging it closer. The movement was slow, clumsy with exhaustion, but deliberate. Even half frozen and hurting, she counted them. She knew when one had drifted too far from warmth. Everett closed his eyes for one breath. Years ago, in a place that had no snow, he had learned the terrible weight of choosing who could be moved and who had to wait. He had learned that some decisions never became clean, no matter how carefully a man wrote them down afterward. Since coming home, he had built his life around smaller choices. Clear trails, marked doors, stocked cabins, enough distance from people that he could not fail them too personally. Now winter had placed 9 lives in a hollow beneath a pine shelf and given him no clean option at all. He opened his eyes. "Negative on holding," he said into the radio. "I'm bringing them down." The dispatcher's voice sharpened. "Voss, confirm you are attempting transport alone." "Confirmed." "I have the rescue sled. Notify Dr. Haskell, if you can reach her. Tell Animal Control I'll meet them below the north gate if the road opens. If not, I'm taking them to my cabin. Voss, I'll update when moving." He clipped the radio back before anyone could talk him into being reasonable. The mother dog watched him stand. Her warning deepened when he turned toward the trail. Then she saw him bring the sled down through the trees. The puppies stirred at the scraping sound. Everett moved slowly, stopping whenever her breathing changed, speaking in a low voice that held no command. The first blanket he unfolded was silver on one side and wool-lined on the other. He placed it on the snow several feet away. The mother dog's ears stood high. When he reached for the smallest puppy, she snapped her head forward with a sudden flash of teeth. Everett froze. "All right," he whispered. "Not first." He withdrew his hand and sat back on his heels. For several seconds, man and dog remained in the cold, each measuring the other. Then Everett did something he had not planned. He unfastened the red wool scarf from inside his collar and laid it between them. It carried wood smoke, sweat, metal, and the faint medicinal scent that never fully left his gear. The mother dog leaned forward an inch. Her nose worked. She did not relax, but the growl thinned. Everett picked up the puppy that had slid away from the others. He kept both hands low, moving the little body only as far as the edge of the blanket. The puppy made a weak sound. The mother struggled, trying to rise, and her injured leg failed beneath her. "No," Everett said softly. "Save it." He wrapped the puppy and slid it close enough for the mother to touch with her nose. She did. Only after that did she allow him to move the next one. By the time all 8 puppies were bundled together in the sled, Everett's fingers had gone stiff inside his gloves. The mother had tried twice to stand. Both times she had fallen back, shaking with pain and fury at her own weakness. Everett could see what it cost her to let him handle her children. Trust was too generous a word for what passed between them. It was more like a temporary ceasefire arranged by necessity. The final problem was her. She weighed far more than the puppies together, and fear made her heavier. Everett secured a folded blanket across the sled's rear section and set 2 straps loose enough not to pin her too tightly. He could not lift her the way he might have lifted a smaller dog. Instead, he used the blanket as a sling, guiding her inch by inch, letting her keep her head toward the puppies. Once her teeth closed around his sleeve. Not hard enough to break skin, hard enough to tell him she still had a choice. He did not pull away. "You can hate me later," he said, breathing through the strain. "Just stay with them now. The dog's jaw released. Getting her onto the sled took nearly 10 minutes. When she was finally settled, her body curved toward the bundle of puppies. One small white head pushed free of the blanket. The mother touched it with her nose, then another, counting again. Everett tightened the straps only enough to keep her from sliding if the trail pitched downward. The light was almost gone. He clipped himself into the harness, took one last look at the hollow, and saw what she had done. The place was not random. She had chosen the only pocket beneath the stone where wind broke over the top instead of cutting straight through. Pine needles had been scraped into a rough bed. Her own body had blocked the open side. She had made a shelter out of pain, instinct, and the last of her strength. Everett swallowed against something lodged in his throat. "Well," he said quietly, "you picked better ground than most people would have." The mother dog's eyes stayed on the puppies. He pulled. The sled resisted at first, runners stuck in the crusted snow. Everett leaned forward, boots digging in, shoulders tightening beneath the coat. The sled shifted, then slid. Behind him the puppies whimpered as the motion began. The mother raised her head sharply, despite the pain, and looked over them one by one. "I know," Everett said, "I know." The forest grew darker around them, but the snow held what light remained. Every tree seemed edged in blue. The trail back to the road was not long, but distance changed when lives were strapped behind you. Twice, Everett stopped to check the puppies. Once he adjusted the blanket around the mother's injured leg. She watched his hands, eyes bright and wary, but she did not growl. Halfway up the slope, the radio crackled. "Voss, status?" He paused, breathing hard. "Moving," he answered. "Slow, all 9 alive." There was silence. Then the dispatcher said more softly, "Copy that, all 9. Everett looked back. The mother dog had lifted her head again. Snow dusted her ears and the bridge of her long muzzle. The puppies lay against her side, white on white beneath the emergency blanket, almost invisible except for their black noses and small movements. She looked too wild for a living room, too wounded for the woods, and too determined to belong to anyone's easy judgment. People would see those eyes and call her dangerous. Maybe they would not be entirely wrong. A mother protecting 8 helpless lives was dangerous to anything that came too close without care. But Everett had spent enough of his life around fear to know this. Fear did not always tell the truth. Sometimes it only pointed at what it did not understand. He faced the trail again and pulled harder. The first lights of Cedar Lark blinked below the trees as evening settled over the valley. Somewhere down there were warm kitchens, plowed streets, closed shop doors, and people who would have opinions by morning. There would be questions, forms, warnings, and men who believed the safest answer was always the one that removed trouble from sight. That was tomorrow's storm. Tonight, there was only the sled, the snow, the ache in Everett's shoulders, and the soft, stubborn sound of 9 breaths behind him. He kept walking until the forest opened toward the road. By the time Everett reached the north road, the last blue of evening had nearly drained out of the sky. His shoulders burned from pulling the rescue sled through uneven snow, but he did not stop long enough to think about the pain. The sled runner scraped over packed ice behind him. Every few steps, a puppy whimpered beneath the blankets, and every time one made a sound, the mother dog lifted her head as if the entire world had narrowed to that small cry. Everett's truck waited where he had left it near the trail marker. Its roof was dusted white, the windshield already clouding with frost. He worked slowly, keeping his movements low and deliberate. First he opened the rear doors. Then he folded the back seats flat, spread 2 wool blankets over the cargo area, and set the smallest puppies inside one by one. The mother dog watched from the sled. Her pale amber eyes stayed fixed on his hands. She was too weak to rise, but not too weak to warn him. A low sound gathered in her chest whenever he lifted a puppy. It faded only after he placed the pup close enough for her to touch. "I know," Everett said, breath showing in the cold. "You count them. I would too." He had no proper crate large enough for her. That worried him. A frightened animal in pain could injure herself during transport, or turn fear into a problem nobody could manage. He took a soft rope from his pack, made a loose restraint, and secured it around the blanket beneath her chest rather than around her neck. Then he lifted with his legs, not his back, guiding her from sled to truck in slow, careful inches. She caught his sleeve again when the pain hit. Not hard, just enough. Everett stopped. His arm remained still inside her mouth. "Easy," he whispered. "No one's taking them." Something in his voice seemed to reach the edge of her panic. Her jaw opened. He felt the release through the thick canvas before he heard it. When she was settled beside the puppies, she nosed through the bundle until all 8 were pressed against her body. Only then did she lower her head. Everett shut the doors gently and stood for 1 second in the falling snow. 9 lives had made it to the road. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the beginning of a responsibility he had not yet earned. The drive to his cabin took almost 30 minutes. He kept the heater running high and the radio low. Twice the county dispatcher asked for an update. Everett answered with short facts. Road passable, animals alive, cabin destination confirmed. No extra words. Extra words had a way of inviting opinions before a man had finished doing what needed to be done. His cabin stood north of Cedar Lark, beyond the last plowed lane and a windbreak of dark pines. It had been built by a mill foreman in the 1960s, then repaired in pieces by men who believed straight lumber could fix almost anything. The porch sagged slightly on the east side. The chimney drew well. The windows were small, but the walls held heat. Usually, when Everett came home, the place received him without question. 1 lamp by the door, 1 chair near the stove, 1 mug rinsed and turned upside down by the sink. No television noise, no footsteps but his own. That night the cabin changed before he had even carried the first puppy inside. The quiet broke into small sounds, thin cries, blanket rustle, nails tapping weakly against the truck bed. Everett pushed open the mudroom door with his shoulder and kicked snow from his boots. He did not bring them into the main room. Not yet. He needed a safer space. The wood room off the back hall was narrow but warm enough if he kept the stove fed. He moved stacked kindling into the shed, swept bark from the floor, laid down a tarp, then covered it with 2 old quilts and a thick canvas drop cloth. He set a portable heater in the far corner, angled away from the bedding. He filled shallow bowls with water and placed them where the mother dog could see them. By the time he brought her in, sweat had cooled along his back. The dog did not like the doorway. Her body stiffened at the threshold, her ears pressed forward. The scent of old wood, iron stove heat, human clothing, and closed walls must have struck her all at once. The puppies shifted in the blanket bundle at Everett's feet, and she tried to drag herself toward them despite the bad leg. "Wait," he said, not a command, a plea. He carried the puppies in first and placed them against the quilted corner. The mother fought the blanket sling until she saw them. Then she focused on the pile of small white bodies and let him guide her down beside them. The moment her side touched the floor, the puppies pushed blindly toward her. Everett stepped back. 1 pup found warmth and quieted. Another rooted at the wrong place and cried in frustration. The smallest one, marked only by its size because none of them wore collars yet, slid backward on the quilt. The mother dog lifted her head and pulled it close with her muzzle. The movement cost her. Her injured leg trembled. Her eyes half closed, but she did not stop until the puppy was tucked against her chest. Everett had seen courage in many forms. Loud courage. Reckless courage. Medal-worthy courage that men later described badly because the truth had frightened them too much. This was quieter. This was a mother too exhausted to stand, still using the last reliable parts of herself to make a wall. He left the room only long enough to call Dr. Lenora Haskell. She answered on the 4th ring. "Haskell." "It's Voss," he said. "I brought in a shepherd-type female and 8 pups. Found them above Harrow Creek. Mothers injured and weak. Pups are cold." There was a brief silence, but not surprise. Lenora Haskell had practiced veterinary medicine in Mill Country, long enough to know that winter made emergencies strange. "How old are the pups?" 5, maybe 6 weeks. Not newborn. Still trying to nurse. "Is the mother alert?" "Too alert when I move wrong. That means she still has something left." A cabinet closed on Lenora's end. "Any bleeding?" "No visible heavy bleeding. Hind leg injury. Dehydrated likely. I'll come. Road's bad. I know the road." She ended the call before he could object. Everett stood in the kitchen with the dead phone in his hand, listening to the room behind him. A puppy squeaked. The mother answered with a low, tired breath. The cabin no longer sounded empty. It sounded fragile. He mixed warm water with a small amount of broth and set the bowl near her. She sniffed it but did not drink. Her eyes tracked him. He sat on the floor outside the woodroom door, far enough to give her space, close enough to be seen. "You don't have to like me," he said. "But you have to drink." The dog blinked slowly. "That's not negotiation. That's medicine." She did not move. Everett almost smiled, but the expression caught somewhere before it reached his face. It was close to 9 when headlights slid across the cabin windows. Dr. Lenora Haskell entered without knocking twice, because she knew Everett would hear the first one and dislike the second. She was 62, though she carried herself with the square steadiness of someone who had wrestled large animals, bad weather, and stubborn owners for most of her adult life. Her silver and gray hair was tucked behind one ear, her glasses fogged at the edges, and a heavy olive veterinary coat hung open over a dark sweater. In one hand she carried a brown medical bag scuffed pale along the corners. She took in Everett's damp coat, the blankets on the floor, the closed angle of his shoulders. Then she looked into the woodroom. "Oh," she said softly, not pity, recognition. The mother dog raised her head and growled. Lenora did not step closer. She lowered herself slowly onto a 3-legged stool near the doorway, as though she had all night and nowhere more important to be. "Beautiful girl," she said. "You look like you've had a hard argument with the mountain." "She looks half wild," Everett said. "She looks exhausted. People may not agree. People rarely examine anything before naming it." Lenora opened her bag without taking her eyes off the dog. She removed a stethoscope, a thermometer, packets of nutrient gel, and a small bottle of antiseptic wash. The metal of the stethoscope caught the stove light. "Do you have a name for her?" "No. You found her. You'll need something to say besides the dog when she tries to bite your sleeve again." She didn't try to bite. Lenora glanced at him. She expressed an opinion with her teeth. This time Everett did smile, faintly. They worked in stages. Lenora had him sit where the mother dog could see him while she moved closer inch by inch. No sudden reaching, no crowding. She spoke in a low voice, not babying the animal, not challenging her either. The mother growled twice, both times when Lenora's hand drifted near the puppies. Lenora adjusted immediately. "Maternal defense," she said. "Pain, stress. Not the same thing as uncontrolled aggression. That will matter? It should. But will it?" Lenora did not answer right away. Outside, wind dragged snow along the cabin wall. "That depends on who gets frightened first," she said. The examination took nearly an hour because none of it could be rushed. The mother was dehydrated. Her gums were pale. Her left hind leg was strained and swollen, possibly sprained rather than broken, though Lenora would need images later to be sure. She was underweight beneath the thick coat, and the milk supply was poor. The puppies were chilled, hungry, and weak but responsive. 2 needed close feeding. 1 needed warmth more than anything. Lenora set the smallest puppy against Everett's chest while she prepared a bottle. "Hold it there." Everett looked down at the tiny white body in his hands. "I'm not exactly set up for this. No one is set up for 8 puppies and a defensive mother in a snowstorm. That's supposed to help. It's supposed to stop you from thinking competence means never needing another person." He said nothing. Lenora placed the bottle in his hand. "Small amounts. Slow. Don't force it." The puppy struggled clumsily, then latched. Everett's large hand went very still. The mother dog watched from the blankets. Her eyes were sharp at first, then uncertain. The puppy made a faint swallowing sound. Everett lowered his gaze, and for reasons he did not want to examine, felt the room shift around him. He had carried injured men, lifted strangers from roadside snowbanks, held pressure on wounds, kept count of breaths in places where counting was the only thing left to do. But this tiny creature drinking from a bottle in his hand asked something different of him. Not bravery, tenderness without witness, care without command, patience without any promise that it would be enough. The mother dog stretched her neck toward him. Everett froze. She did not growl. She sniffed the air between his hand and the puppy, then eased her head back down. It was not trust, not yet. But it was the first inch of something. Lenora saw it. She wisely did not comment. By morning, the storm had settled over Cedar Lark like a lid. Snow blurred the tree line. The road below the cabin was plowed only in one narrow track, and the county scanner on Everett's counter muttered about delays, stuck vehicles, and a downed limb near Mill Spur. Lenora had left after midnight with a written care plan taped to his refrigerator. Warmth schedule, feeding notes, hydration checks, signs of distress, call times. She had also left more supplies than Everett had asked for, because she knew asking was not his strongest habit. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, damp fur, warmed milk, and clean towels. Everett had not slept. He had fed the 2 weakest puppies twice, changed bedding once, and convinced the mother dog to drink half a bowl of broth. By dawn, he had given her a name, Sable. It was not for her color. Nothing about her was dark. It was for the old painter's brush he had once found in a field kit, a sable brush used for careful work, fine lines, slow patience, a thing made to touch lightly. "You don't have to approve," he told her. Sable looked at him as if approval had never been part of her duties. At 8:15, Everett's phone began to ring. First, the dispatcher checking status. Then Lenora asking whether the smallest puppy had taken more formula. Then a neighbor from down the road who had heard from her cousin that Everett had brought home wolves. He did not answer that one. By 9, the story had improved itself in town. A white wolf had come out of Harrow Creek. No, a wolf dog. No, a whole den of them. The mother had chased a snowplow. The puppies had been found under a dead elk. Everett stood at his sink, drinking coffee that had gone cold, and watched through the window as a plow truck slowed near his driveway. The driver, a broad man in an orange cap, stared toward the cabin long enough to miss the edge of the road. He corrected sharply and drove on. "Here we go," Everett muttered. Sable lifted her head at the sound of the truck. Her ears stood high. The puppies shifted against her belly. Everett moved to the woodroom door and waited until she looked at him. "Noise," he said. "That's all." He did not know whether the word mattered, but his calm did. Her head lowered by an inch. At 10, another vehicle came up the road. This one did not slow and leave. A county animal services truck stopped near the gate, tires crunching into packed snow. Behind it came a smaller SUV with the county seal on the door. 2 uniformed staff stepped out first, both keeping their hands visible and their eyes on the house. Then a woman climbed from the SUV with a yellow clipboard tucked beneath one arm. Tessa Rowan Pike did not waste movement. She was 48, tall and lean under a dark county parka, with a low black ponytail streaked with silver, and the kind of face that had spent years being firm before anyone gave her reason to be kind. A radio sat clipped to her shoulder. Snow gathered on the brim of her knit cap as she studied Everett's fence, the tracks in the yard, the cabin door, and finally Everett himself. He stepped onto the porch. Tessa, Voss. They had met before, usually over lost dogs, injured deer near the road, or hikers who had mistaken a pet for a rescue plan. She was not a woman who enjoyed conflict. She simply believed that avoiding it early made it larger later. "I need to see the animals," she said. "Doctor Haskell examined them last night. I spoke with her. I still need to see them." Everett nodded once. "You can look from the doorway. No one goes in close." Tessa's expression tightened. "That may not be your call. It is inside my house. If that animal is a wolf hybrid, injured, unsocialized, and guarding young, then this is a public safety issue. She's not guarding the public. She's guarding her pups. That distinction matters less after somebody gets hurt." The words were reasonable. Everett disliked them anyway. He opened the door and let them into the mudroom. Warm air rolled out, carrying the scent of milk and wet towels. The 2 staff remained behind Tessa, one holding a carrier, the other a catchpole kept low and unused. Everett saw Sable notice it. Her body changed before she made a sound, shoulders tightening, head lifting, eyes locking not on the people but on the pole. "Move that out of sight," he said. The staff member hesitated. Tessa raised one hand. "Put it back in the truck." "Tessa, now." The pole left the room. Sable's growl had already started, but it did not rise. Everett stepped halfway between the doorway and the blankets, not blocking anyone dramatically, not reaching for the dog, just placing his body where the room could settle around it. Tessa looked past him. For a few seconds she said nothing. The 8 puppies were pressed into a warm pile beside Sable's ribs, white fur against white towels. Sable's left hind leg was stretched awkwardly, wrapped lightly from Lenora's visit. Her eyes were bright, wary, and exhausted. She looked less like a monster than rumor had promised, but more complicated than a pet anyone could simply trust. Tessa made a note on her clipboard. She needs quarantine and behavioral assessment. She needs rest. She can get both at the facility. No, Everett said. One of the staff shifted. Tessa's gaze returned to him. Mr. Voss, I understand you helped them through the night, but you are not equipped to house a possible wolf hybrid and 8 pups long-term. I'm not claiming long-term. The facility has kennels, isolation space, records, staff, protocols, and noise, strange smells, concrete, metal doors, dogs barking on both sides, people reaching in because their job says they have to. Everett kept his voice even. Look at her. Tessa did not. Everett continued, quieter. She let Dr. Haskell examine her because we slowed everything down. You move her now, with that leg and those pups, and you won't get an assessment. You'll get panic and call it proof. Tessa's jaw worked slightly. That landed somewhere. Not enough to change her mind, but enough to make her pause. From the blankets, one puppy rolled away from the others and gave a thin cry. Sable turned immediately, pain flickering through her body as she nosed it back. The movement was clumsy and gentle. The room went quiet around it. Even the staff watched. Everett did not press the advantage. Men who pushed too hard often turn truth into argument. Tessa wrote something down. Here is what I know, she said. There are reports in town already. A plow driver says he saw a white wolf near Harrow Creek 2 days ago. A mill worker claims an animal matching her description crossed behind the lumber yard last week. I don't know what she is. I don't know where she came from. I don't know whether those pups are healthy. Until I know those things, my responsibility is to the animals and to the people who live near them. I'm not asking you to ignore your responsibility. You're asking me not to do my job. I'm asking you to let me be part of doing it. The answer surprised both of them a little. Everett felt it after he said it. The difference between refusal and offer, between standing alone in a doorway and opening one under conditions he could live with. Tessa studied him. What exactly are you proposing? A temporary hold here, under your supervision. Dr. Haskell's care plan. You inspect the setup. I reinforce the fence today. No visitors near the animals. No public contact. You want weights, feedings, temperature checks, I log them. You want photos, you get them. You want DNA testing, take the sample when Lenora says it won't set her back. And if I say no, Everett looked toward Sable and the puppies. Then I'll ask you to wait until Dr. Haskell is here before you move them. That is not the same as compliance. No, Everett said. It's the closest thing I can give you without failing them. Tessa held his gaze for a long moment. Outside, another gust of snow swept against the windows. Inside, the smallest puppy found its way under Sable's chin. The mother dog lowered her muzzle around it, not hiding it, not offering it, simply keeping it alive while people decided what kind of danger she was. Tessa closed her clipboard. I'm not approving anything yet. I heard you. I'm going to call Dr. Haskell. I'm going to inspect the exterior. I'm going to document conditions. Nobody touches that dog until we have a safer plan. Everett nodded. It was not a victory, not even close. But for the first time since the forest, the decision had not moved farther away from Mercy. Tessa turned toward the door, then paused. What's her name? Everett looked at Sable. The dog's amber eyes remained fixed on all of them, wild with pain, clear with purpose. Sable, he said. Tessa looked at the white dog for another second. That name won't help your case. No, Everett said, but it helps mine. By noon, the storm had deepened, and 3 sets of official tire tracks marked the snow outside Everett's cabin. The town below had begun to talk. The county had begun to watch. The woman with the clipboard had not taken the dogs away, but she had not promised they could stay either. Everett stood in the woodroom doorway after everyone stepped back outside. The cabin was no longer his quiet refuge. It had become a shelter, a risk, a question, and maybe the first place in years where something needed more from him than silence. Sable rested her head near the puppies. Her eyes followed him, less sharply now. Everett lowered himself to the floor across from her, leaving the doorway open behind him. Temporary, he said. The word sounded thin in the warm room. One of the puppies sneezed. Another pushed its tiny black nose into the fold of his red scarf, still lying near the bedding from the night before. Sable watched the pup, then watched Everett. She did not growl. Outside, a county radio crackled near the truck. Inside, for one careful breath, the cabin held. By noon, Cedar Lark had already decided what it feared. The storm had not fully passed, but the streets below Everett's cabin were open enough for trucks to move again. Snowplows rolled through town with their yellow lights turning slowly in the gray daylight. Men in work coats stood outside the feed store longer than the cold required. Someone had taped a handwritten notice to the door of the community hall before breakfast. County meeting, animal safety concern, 4 p.m. No one had written Sable's name on the paper. They did not need to. By 3:30, nearly every parking space near the community hall was filled. The building sat beside the old rail spur, a square structure of brown brick and faded green trim that had hosted retirement suppers, mill closures, winter fundraisers, and more arguments than anyone cared to count. A row of snow shovels leaned beside the entrance. Work boots left wet half-moons across the floor. Everett arrived 5 minutes before the meeting began. He had left Sable and the puppies at the cabin under Dr. Lenora Haskell's temporary care. Leaving them at all had felt wrong, but Lenora had looked at him over her glasses and said, "If you want them to stay, you need to speak where the decision is being made." So he came. He wore his dark wool coat instead of the waxed canvas one, a clean flannel shirt beneath it, and boots he had brushed free of mud. He had not dressed up to impress anyone. He had dressed carefully, because he understood the difference between a man making a request and a man daring the town to refuse him. Tessa Rowan Pike stood near the front table, yellow clipboard under one arm, speaking quietly with Deputy Hollis Crane from the sheriff's office. Hollis was lean and fair-haired, with a winter rescue map folded into the pocket of his brown county jacket. He had helped Everett twice before on lost hiker calls and had the habit of listening first, which made people underestimate how much he noticed. Tessa saw Everett enter and gave him a short nod. No warmth, no hostility. That was something. The room held about 40 people, most of them adults who had spent their lives in hard weather and harder work. Sawmill hands, plow drivers, a woman from the diner still wearing her apron under her coat, 2 retired rail workers, the owner of the hardware store, a few curious faces who had no business being there except that fear gave people a reason to gather. Near the middle row sat Boone Carver Ellison, the sawmill foreman. Boone was built like a man shaped by timber and machinery. Thick arms, heavy shoulders, a short neck disappearing into a denim jacket lined with shearling. His mustache was gray-brown and full, his face red from the cold, and a yellow carpenter's pencil was tucked behind one ear. He did not look at Everett when Everett came in. He looked at the floor between his boots. One hand closed around the edge of the chair. Everett knew Boone well enough to know he was not a cruel man. Boone donated lumber when roofs caved in. He fixed porch steps for widows and pretended not to hear thanks. He sent younger workers home when they were too tired to safely finish a shift. But years ago, before Everett had moved back to Cedar Lark, Boone had been hurt by a large dog behind an unlicensed salvage yard. He rarely spoke of it. He did not need to. The scar down his forearm told the story every time he rolled up his sleeves. To Boone, a powerful dog that did not trust people was not a tragedy. It was a warning. Tessa called the meeting to order without ceremony. "This is not a vote," she said, standing behind the front table. "I want that clear. County Animal Services is responsible for determining the safest next step. But because the animals are currently housed near town, and because concerns have been raised, we're going to explain the situation and hear relevant information." A man near the back muttered, "Relevant means what she says it means." Tessa turned her head slightly. "Relevant means facts." The room quieted. She laid out what she knew. An adult female shepherd-type dog had been found injured above Harrow Creek with 8 puppies. The animal had an unknown owner, unknown vaccination status, and no readable identification. Several residents had reported seeing a white, wolf-like animal near the timber road in recent days. The mother dog had shown defensive behavior when approached. Because of her appearance and behavior, Animal Services could not rule out wolf hybrid ancestry without testing or proper evaluation. Everett listened without interrupting. That was harder than he expected. Tessa did not exaggerate, but facts arranged in a certain order could still build a cage around a living thing. "We need quarantine," she continued. "We need medical assessment. We need behavior observation. We need to know whether the puppies are healthy and whether the mother can be safely handled. The county facility exists for that reason." A few people nodded. Then Boone stood. Chairs creaked as people shifted to see him. "I'm not here because I hate dogs," he said. His voice was deep, with a gravel edge that came from years shouting over saws. "Most folks know I don't. My sister has 2. My crew has more dogs than trucks. But this isn't somebody's lab getting loose after supper." He looked at Tessa, not Everett. "You said it yourself, unknown animal, possible wolf mix, 8 pups, injured mother. That is not a pet. That is a risk sitting half a mile from homes." Someone murmured agreement. Boone lifted his right arm slightly, then let it fall. He did not show the scar, but everyone knew it was there. People always say an animal only acts dangerous because it's scared. Maybe that's true, but scared teeth still hurt. Scared animals still get loose. If the county has a place for this, take them there before everybody gets sentimental and stupid. The last words struck the room sharply. Everett felt several faces turn toward him. He did not rise yet. Tessa asked if anyone else wished to speak. A diner cook said the puppies should not be punished for being born in the snow. A plow driver said he had seen the white shape near Harrow Creek and nearly put his truck in a ditch. A retired rail worker asked whether wolf hybrids were even legal in the county. Tessa said ownership laws were complicated and depended on classification, but the immediate issue was containment and care. Everett watched the room become what rooms became when fear was given chairs and fluorescent lights. Not evil, just certain too quickly. Then the side door opened, letting in a ribbon of cold air. Marin Bell Whitaker stepped inside with her woven basket hooked over one arm. She was 73, small, and wrapped in a cream cardigan beneath an old blue winter coat. Her white hair was pinned low at the back of her head, though a few loose strands had escaped around her cheeks. She paused on the mat to stamp snow from her boots, then looked at the full room as if she had entered a church supper rather than a public argument. "Marin," Tessa said, gentler than she had sounded all afternoon. "I'm late," Marin replied. "That hill is rude in winter." A few people smiled despite themselves. Marin had lived in Cedar Lark longer than half the room had been alive. Her husband had worked the mill until his hands could no longer close properly around tools. After he passed, she kept showing up for other people anyway, with soup, spare blankets, funeral casseroles, birthday cakes for men who pretended not to want them, and Christmas cards for people who had no close family left. In Cedar Lark, there were officials, employers, and loud men at counters. Then there was Marin. She sat near the front, but before lowering herself into the chair, she looked at Everett. Did she drink? Everett nodded. Some. The smallest pup, twice from the bottle. "Good," she said, as if that mattered more than any rumor in the room. Boone shifted in his seat. Tessa drew the conversation back. "Mr. Voss used to address the county's concerns." Everett stood. He had spoken in harder rooms, briefing tents, aid stations, places where men pretended exhaustion was discipline. But this was different. These were people who knew which porch light was his, which road he drove, how rarely he came to town unless there was work to be done. He could not hide behind rank, title, or distance. He placed both hands on the back of the chair in front of him. "I understand why people are worried," he said. That was not what some expected. He saw it in their faces. "I would be worried too if all I heard was that a wolf-looking dog was up near the houses. She's large. She's hurt. She has 8 pups. She warned people away. None of that is nothing." Boone looked at him then. Everett continued, but Dr. Haskell examined her. The dog did not show uncontrolled aggression. She showed pain response and maternal defense. Those are not the same thing. If the county moves her now into a loud facility, separates her from the pups, or forces handling too quickly, the behavior everyone fears may get worse. Tessa did not interrupt. Everett reached into his coat and unfolded a sheet of paper. "I'm not asking anyone to trust my feelings. I wrote a plan." The room stilled in a different way. He read it plainly. Exterior fence reinforcement before nightfall. A temporary interior kennel in the woodroom, with heated bedding and non-slip flooring. No public access to the animals. Twice daily feeding logs for the puppies. Weight checks morning and evening. Hydration records for the mother. Veterinary visits as scheduled by Dr. Haskell. Animal Services inspection access with notice when practical, and emergency access if needed. No contact with neighboring animals. No removal from the property without county approval. DNA testing and vaccination schedule when medically appropriate. He did not dress it up. He did not ask them to love Sable. He asked them to measure the difference between danger and fear. When he finished, the only sound was the heater humming along the wall. Tessa held out her hand for the paper. He gave it to her. She read it slowly. Hollis Crane leaned in just enough to see the top page. "Who helped you write this?" Tessa asked. "No one." Lenora, sitting along the side wall, lifted one eyebrow. Everett corrected himself. "Dr. Haskell gave me the medical schedule." "That's different from no one," Marin said. A soft ripple of amusement passed through the room. Everett glanced at her, and for the first time that day something in his chest loosened. Boone stood again. "You got a good plan on paper," he said. "Paper doesn't hold a gate shut." "No," Everett said. "Steel does, wood does, a second latch does. I'll install all three." "By yourself?" Everett paused. The old answer rose automatically. Yes, he could have said it. He wanted to say it because solitude had trained him to treat help as proof that he had miscalculated. But then he saw Marin's basket on her lap, Lenora's tired eyes, Tessa's clipboard, Hollis's folded map, and Boone's scarred arm. A plan that depended on one man never sleeping was not a plan. "No," Everett said. The word surprised the room more than any argument could have. He looked at Boone. "I'll need lumber." Boone's mouth tightened. "I'll pay for it," Everett added. "That's not what I asked." "You didn't ask anything." "I was getting there." A few people turned toward Boone. The foreman took the pencil from behind his ear, rolled it between his fingers, then shoved it back. "I'll send scrap rails and 2 sheets of plywood. Not because I think this is smart. Because if it's going to happen, I'd rather the fence not be built by a man who hasn't slept." It was not approval. In Cedar Lark, it was nearly an embrace. Tessa looked from Boone to Everett, then to Lenora. "Dr. Haskell, medical opinion?" Lenora stood from the side wall. She had not spoken before because she disliked being used as decoration in public disputes. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "The mother is unstable because she is injured, dehydrated, exhausted, and protecting young. Moving her immediately may be medically possible, but not ideal. Keeping her in place carries risk, but that risk can be managed if Mr. Voss follows the care plan and if Animal Services has oversight." Tessa asked, "Do you believe the county facility is unsafe?" "No. I believe the timing is bad." That distinction mattered. Everett saw Tessa absorb it. Hollis Crane spoke next. "Road conditions are also a factor. If we move them tonight and weather turns again, transport could become its own problem." Tessa gave him a brief look. "Noted." Then Marin raised one hand. Tessa's expression softened despite herself. "Mrs. Whitaker." "I don't know anything about wolf blood," Marin said. "I know about frightened mothers. I know about hurt creatures. And I know Mr. Voss keeps his promises better than he keeps company." That brought a few quiet laughs, even from the back. Marin turned in her chair and looked at the room. "I went to his cabin this morning. I did not go near the dog. I sat outside the room and talked a little. That animal did not want trouble. She wanted everyone to stop reaching before she understood what they meant." "There is a difference." Boone sighed, but not with contempt. Marin's hand tightened on the basket handle. "Some of you remember when my husband got sick," she said. "People brought food and shoveled our walk before we asked. Nobody said, 'Take him somewhere else because sickness makes us uncomfortable.' We made room. Maybe we can make room carefully now." The room grew quiet around that. Everett looked down. He did not want Marin spending her grief on his argument. Yet he understood why she had done it. Some truths could not be carried by facts alone. They needed a person everyone trusted to place them on the table. Tessa did not decide quickly. She asked more questions. Exact distance from cabin to nearest residence, fence height, door locks, heating safety, waste disposal, whether Everett owned other animals, whether any minors lived nearby. None did. Whether he would accept daily check-ins for the first week. He would. Whether he would sign a temporary care agreement acknowledging county authority if conditions changed. He would. With every answer, the issue became less like a rumor and more like work. Work, Cedar Lark understood. By the end, Tessa stood with the yellow clipboard held against her coat. "Here is the decision," she said. The animals remain at Mr. Voss's cabin under temporary supervised hold for 72 hours. During that time, Dr. Haskell oversees medical care. Animal Services will inspect containment. No public contact. No visitors near the mother or pups. If the mother shows unprovoked aggression, if containment fails, or if medical conditions worsen beyond what can be treated there, the county will transfer them to the facility. The room reacted in layers: relief, displeasure, murmurs, a few sharp whispers. Tessa raised her voice only slightly. This is not ownership. This is not permanent placement. This is a controlled hold. She looked at Everett. And you are responsible for every part of it. Everett nodded. I understand. Boone pushed back his chair. I'll have lumber up there before dark. Tessa looked at him. The county did not ask. I'm not doing it for the county. Marin stood slowly, basket over one arm. I have old towels, she said. Clean ones, not pretty ones. Lenora closed her bag. Pretty is not a medical requirement. For the first time, the meeting did not feel like a room deciding whether to fear something. It felt like a town remembering how to solve a problem without pretending everyone had to agree first. Everett left the hall with the temporary care agreement folded in his coat pocket. Outside, the air had sharpened. Snow squeaked beneath his boots. Across the street, the diner windows glowed amber, and beyond them the old mill stood dark against the ridge. Boone was already at his truck, talking into his phone, probably ordering rails and fasteners before anyone could thank him. Marin came down the steps behind Everett. You look like you forgot how to breathe in there, she said. I breathed enough. That is not the same as well. He turned toward her. She looked smaller against the snow than she had inside, but not weaker. There was a pale tiredness around her mouth that he had not noticed before. She caught him noticing and gave him a look sharp enough to stop the question. Don't start, she said. I didn't say anything. You were arranging worry on your face. Everett looked away, almost smiling. Marin held out the basket. Take this. What is it? Soup, bread towels, a jar of honey, and a list of things you will forget if no one writes them down. I have a list. You have a military list. This is a house list. He accepted it because refusing Marin required more energy than carrying anything she handed him. At his truck, he paused before opening the door. Thank you, he said. Marin adjusted her scarf, the deep plum one she wore whenever winter had made the world too pale. Do not thank me yet, she said. That white mother has not decided whether I am tolerable. She may take time. So do most worthwhile creatures. Everett drove back up the hill with the agreement in his pocket, Marin's basket on the passenger seat, and a new kind of weight sitting beside both. The dogs had not been taken. That mattered, but keeping them now meant more than sheltering them from cold. It meant logs, latches, inspections, neighbors, phone calls, people stepping through the edges of his life. He had asked to be part of doing the job. Now the town had agreed. When he reached the cabin, Lenora opened the door before he knocked. Her sleeves were rolled, and a streak of formula marked one cuff. The little one ate, she said. Everett stepped inside. In the woodroom, Sable lay curled around the puppies, her white coat bright against the darker quilts. Her eyes lifted to him. A low sound moved in her throat, then faded when she recognized his step. He set Marin's basket on the table and removed the folded agreement from his coat. 72 hours, he told Lenora. Then we'd better make them count. Outside, a truck engine climbed the road. Boone's lumber delivery, most likely. Another set of tracks in the snow. Another person pulled into the circle around the fragile white family in Everett's woodroom. Sable raised her head at the sound, alert but not panicked. Everett stood in the doorway, holding the agreement that allowed her to stay, and the basket from the first neighbor who had chosen kindness before proof. For the first time since he found the tracks near Harrow Creek, he understood the real work ahead. He was not only protecting Sable and her puppies from the mountain anymore. He was protecting them from the shape fear took when it gathered in good people. For the first 3 days, Everett measured time by small things, not by sunrise or nightfall, not by the county's 72-hour hold, not even by the hours written on Dr. Haskell's care sheet taped to the refrigerator. He measured it by the ounces of formula each puppy took, by the number of times Sable drank without being coaxed, by whether the smallest pup's paws felt cold or warm inside his palm. By the scratch of his pencil in the notebook Tessa had required, though by the second morning the notebook no longer felt like something imposed on him. It had become a way to keep fear from becoming shapeless. 6:10 a.m. Smallest pup took ½ ounce, slow but steady. 6:40 a.m. Sable drank broth. No growl when bowl moved. 7:15 a.m. Bedding changed. Left hind leg swollen but less trembling. 8:05 a.m. All 8 pups breathing evenly. The entries were plain. They had to be. If he let emotion into them, he would never stop writing. Outside, Cedar Lark continued under snow. The mill whistle blew at shift change, even though half the old buildings no longer ran. Trucks crawled along the timber road. Somewhere down in town, people were still talking about the white dog at Everett Voss's cabin. Some called her a shepherd. Some called her a wolf mix. Some had already decided that words like mother and injured were excuses people used when they wanted Danger to look softer. Inside the cabin, Danger looked tired. Sable lay on the quilts in the converted wood room, her white coat brushed clean in patches and still rough in others. Lenora had wrapped her left hind leg again after checking the swelling. The bandage was neat, but Sable hated it. Every few minutes she turned her head as if offended that part of her body had been claimed by human cloth. Her puppies had grown louder as they warmed. They crawled over one another in a small white pile, noses black and shining, paws kneading at the blanket. Everett had tied loose bits of colored yarn near the bedding, not around their necks yet, just beside their spots, so he could keep them straight in the log. Red for the smallest. Green for the one that always turned back toward its mother's face. Mustard yellow for the bold one that kept trying to climb over Sable's front leg. Blue for the pup that fell asleep fastest after feeding. He had not meant to name them. Names made departures harder. But Marin had stood on the porch that morning with a covered bowl and said, "If you are going to write smallest pup 40 times a day, you may as well call that one something kind." So the red-marked pup became Pip. Everett pretended not to care. Pip was the one he checked first. Tessa came for the morning inspection at 9. She did not arrive with the full truck this time. Just her county SUV, her yellow clipboard, and a thermos tucked under one arm. She knocked once, then waited. That helped. Sable noticed the difference. The first visit had filled the room with official footsteps and metal tension. This visit came slower. Everett opened the door. "Morning," Tessa said. "Road clear? For now. Boone's crew dropped your lumber? Before dawn." That man thinks sleeping is a character flaw. He's not alone. Tessa gave him a look and he stepped aside. She removed her boots in the mudroom without being asked. That also helped. Sable could hear her, but the heavy tread stopped before entering the hall. Tessa stood at the woodroom doorway and looked over the setup. Fresh bedding, bowls washed and lined along the wall, heater guarded behind a metal screen, logbook on a stool, supplies stacked in labeled bins. "No visitors?" she asked. "No. Marin, porch only." Tessa's eyebrow lifted. "She brought soup," Everett added, as if that explained all exceptions in Cedar Lark. "In this county it often does." Sable raised her head when Tessa leaned to see the pups. A low growl moved through her chest. Tessa stopped immediately. Everett lowered himself onto the floor near Sable, not touching her, just placing one hand flat against the boards. Sable's eyes flicked to him. The growl faded but did not disappear completely. Tessa watched the exchange. "She keys off you. She knows I'm not reaching. She knows you're between her and me. Maybe. That can be useful. It can also be a problem." Everett did not argue. He had learned that arguing with true statements only made a man sound guilty of something. Lenora arrived 10 minutes later, carrying her medical bag and a paper sack from the diner. She set the sack on Everett's kitchen counter. "Breakfast," she said. "I ate." "No, you poured coffee into an empty stomach and called it discipline." Tessa made a note without looking up. "Poor self-care by temporary animal custodian." Everett stared at her. "That was a joke," Tessa said. Lenora took off her coat. From Tessa, that is practically a parade. The room should have felt crowded with 3 adults moving through his cabin. Instead, Everett found himself noticing how each of them had learned to change their shape around Sable. Lenora moved like weather. Steady, predictable, never straight at the injured leg until the dog had watched her hands long enough. Tessa stayed near the doorway, writing more than speaking. Marin's basket waited on the porch bench, visible through the kitchen window, because Marin had decided not to enter until Sable recognized her voice without bracing. It was strange how a house could begin to hold people without becoming less his. Or maybe it had never been as much his as he thought. Maybe he had only been the one maintaining the silence. Lenora examined Sable in short steps. Temperature, gums, hydration, bandage. She let Everett offer broth while she checked the leg. Sable growled once when Lenora's fingers brushed too close to the swollen joint, but she did not snap. Her body shook with restraint. "Good," Lenora murmured. "That's good, girl. You told me I listened." Tessa looked up from her clipboard. "You talked to her," like she answered. "She did." She growled. "That is an answer." Everett looked at Sable. "Not the one people like. People prefer silence until silence becomes inconvenient," Lenora said. The words settled more heavily than she seemed to intend. Everett turned away first. By afternoon, the new fence rails were up. Boone had delivered the lumber, but he had not stayed. He sent 2 younger mill workers to unload it, both careful not to look too long at the cabin windows. Everett worked alone after that, sinking posts through crusted snow into old ground that did not want to be opened. The outer fence already existed, but now he added an interior run between the cabin and shed, creating a buffer gate. Steel latch, backup chain, no gaps wide enough for a pup once the pups were old enough to wander. He was tightening the last hinge when Marin called from the road. "Everett Voss, if you pretend not to hear me, I will assume you've frozen standing up." He glanced over his shoulder. Marin Bell Whitaker stood at the edge of the drive in her old blue coat, the plum scarf wrapped twice around her neck. The woven basket hung from her arm. Snow had gathered on her white hair and shoulders, but she did not seem inclined to hurry. She looked smaller against the trees than she did in rooms. Yet she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had fed half the town through one hardship or another. "You're not supposed to come up the drive," he said. "I am on the road side of the gate." "That is a distinction. I'm old. Distinctions are one of my few remaining luxuries." He walked toward her, wiping his hands on a rag. She studied the new fence. Boone sent good wood. He sent scrap. Good scrap. That counts as affection from him. Everett opened his mouth, then closed it. In Cedar Lark, that was probably true. Marin held out the basket. "Bread, towels, and something sweet for you because Dr. Haskell says you are becoming unpleasant." "I was unpleasant before. Not this efficiently." He took the basket. Behind him, from inside the cabin, Sable gave a low sound. Not a bark. Not quite a whine. Marin lifted her head slightly. "She hears me. She knows your steps." Marin's eyes softened. "Does she? She reacts before you knock." "Well." Marin looked toward the cabin window. "That's something, isn't it?" As if answering, Sable's shape appeared beyond the glass. She had pulled herself high enough to see through the lower pane in the wood-room door. Her white face was framed by shadow. Her ears stood tall. She stared at Marin with that unsettling amber focus. Marin did not wave. She did not call out. She simply placed one gloved hand against the outside of her coat, over her heart, and stood still. For a long moment the old woman and the white dog looked at one another across the yard, through glass, snow, and all the caution that life had taught them. Then Sable lowered her head and disappeared from the window. Marin released a breath that almost became a laugh. "I have been accepted by stricter committees," she said, "but not many." Everett noticed then that her other hand had closed around the porch rail. Her face had paled beneath the cold. "You all right?" She straightened too quickly. "I am 73 in February weather. That is not a medical event. That is arithmetic. You should sit. I should go home before you begin organizing me. Marin." The firmness in his voice surprised them both. For a second she looked not offended, but caught. Then she softened it with a smile. "I had a cough this morning, that is all." He did not believe it was all. He also knew she would not let him carry concern into her house, and set it on the table like another covered dish. "Call if you need anything," he said. "I always need something," she replied. "I rarely admit it." She turned carefully and began walking back toward her cottage beyond the bend. Everett watched until she reached the road. Inside the cabin, Sable made the low sound again. He turned. She was back at the window, eyes fixed not on him, but on the place where Marin had disappeared. That evening Pip refused the bottle. The small red-marked pup turned its head away after 2 weak attempts and tucked its nose into the blanket. Everett tried again 10 minutes later, then warmed the formula another degree, then checked the pup's mouth, belly, paws, breathing. Every action was careful. Every careful action made his pulse beat harder. Lenora had told him what to watch for. She had also told him not to panic early. There was a distance between watchful and frantic, and Everett had spent much of his life crossing it too fast. "Come on," he whispered. Pip did not respond. The other pups slept in a pile against Sable, full-bellied and warm. Sable's head was lifted. Her eyes tracked Pip in Everett's hands. She did not growl. That made it worse somehow. Her trust, such as it was, had handed him the smallest life in the room. He tried again. A little formula touched Pip's mouth. The pup swallowed once, then stopped. Everett's mind betrayed him with an old memory. A field cot. A young man trying to breathe through dust. The terrible quiet after all the right steps had been taken and still were not enough. He set the bottle down before his hand could shake. "No," he said aloud. Sable's ears moved. He reached for the phone and called Lenora. She answered on the second ring. "Talk to me. Pip's not feeding. How long?" "Since the last check. Breathing is steady, warm but less active." "Did you try stimulating gently?" "Yes." "Sugar water on the gums?" "Not yet. Do that. I'm coming." The line clicked off. Everett prepared what Lenora had instructed, but the old pressure was already building in him. The belief that if he stayed awake enough, watched closely enough, carried enough, he could force the outcome toward mercy. He knew better. Knowledge did not stop the feeling. A knock came at the front door before Lenora could have arrived. Marin. She stood there with no basket this time, only a folded towel under one arm and a look that said she had known, somehow, that the house had changed. "You called the doctor," she said. "Yes? One of the babies?" He nodded. She stepped inside without asking, then stopped at the line Everett had marked with painter's tape on the floor. No visitors beyond that point. She looked at it and stayed behind it. "What can I do from here?" "Nothing." That is almost never true. He wanted to tell her to go home. He wanted to tell her the cabin was under county conditions, that Sable was stressed, that he had it handled. The words lined up in him like soldiers waiting for orders. Then Pip made a sound so small it nearly broke apart before becoming real. Everett looked down. Marin's voice came gently from behind the tape. "Give me something to time." He turned. "What? Breaths, drops, minutes. I raised a husband through lung trouble, and sat with millwives through every illness winter could invent. I can count quietly. It was not medical expertise. It was not authority. It was presence." Everett handed her the kitchen timer from the counter. 3 minutes between attempts," he said. "Then 3 minutes it is." She sat on a chair just beyond the tape, folded her hands around the timer, and said nothing else. That was the gift. Not advice. Not comfort spoken too soon. Just another person holding part of the waiting. When Lenora arrived, she moved fast but not harshly. She checked Pip, warmed the pup more directly, showed Everett a better angle for feeding, and added a little nutritional support. Tessa arrived shortly after, called by Lenora, because the care agreement required updates for health concerns. She came in with wet hair under her cap and no clipboard in her hands at first. For once the official paper could wait. The cabin held 4 adults, 1 injured mother dog, and 8 small lives breathing unevenly through the night. Nobody crowded Sable. Nobody crossed the taped line without need. Marin kept time. Tessa wrote when Lenora asked her to record amounts. Everett held Pip against his chest, warming the pup beneath his flannel shirt while feeling each faint movement as if it were a verdict. Near midnight, Pip swallowed. Not much. A few drops. Then a little more. Lenora did not celebrate. She only nodded. Again in 5. Marin reset the timer. Tessa wrote the amount. Everett bowed his head. Across the room, Sable watched him. Her eyes were tired, but something in them had changed. She nudged the quilt with her nose, making a small hollow between her front legs. When Lenora said it was safe, Everett placed Pip there. The tiny pup twitched once, then crawled, slowly, clumsily, with absurd effort. Pip pushed forward until its head reached the warmth beneath Sable's chin. Sable lowered her muzzle and drew the pup closer. Everett sat back on the floor. His whole body felt hollowed by exhaustion. He had done less than he wanted, and more than he could have done alone. That was the part he did not know how to name. Marin rose carefully from the chair. There now. Tessa looked at the taped line on the floor, the logbook, the clean bowls, the old woman with the timer, the veterinarian packing supplies, and Everett sitting with his hands open on his knees. "This needs to go in the report," she said. Everett looked up, tired enough not to hide irritation. What does? That the care plan only worked because multiple people followed it. He expected it to sound like criticism. It did not. Lenora closed her medical bag. That may be the first useful sentence a county report has ever contained. Tessa ignored that, but the corner of her mouth shifted. Outside, the wind moved softly along the eaves. The sawmill was quiet. The town was asleep, or pretending to be. In the woodroom, 8 white puppies lay against their mother, and the weakest one had found its way back by inches. Everett looked at Sable. For the first time, he wondered if she had known from the beginning what he was still learning. A single body could block wind for a while. It took more than one to keep warmth alive. The morning began too quietly. Everett noticed it before he understood why. Snow had fallen all night in a slow, patient sheet, covering the new fence rails, the porch steps, Boone's tire tracks, and the narrow path Marin usually made between her cottage and his cabin. By dawn, the world outside looked newly made and untouched. The pines stood with white weight on their branches. The road below the cabin had disappeared into a pale curve. Even the old mill buildings in the distance seemed softened, their roofs shining beneath the cold sky. Inside, the cabin had settled into its strange new rhythm. The stove clicked. The heater hummed behind its safety screen. 8 white puppies slept in an uneven pile against Sable's side, their small bodies rising and falling beneath the quilts. Pip, still smaller than the rest, had taken formula at 5:30 and again at 6:10. Everett had written both feedings in the notebook, along with Sable's water intake, and the fact that she had allowed him to change the outer towel without growling. That alone would have been worth noting a week ago. Now it felt like part of the day's ordinary work. Everett stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing a bottle, when he looked out the window toward Marin's cottage. Her kitchen curtains were still closed. He paused with the bottle in his hand. Marin opened those curtains every morning at 7, not 7:30, not when she got around to it. 7. She claimed the house needed to see the day before she did. After that, a small lamp would glow in the kitchen. Then smoke would begin to rise from her chimney. Then, sometime before 8, she would appear on the road with her basket hooked over one arm. It was nearly 8:15. The curtains remained drawn. Everett looked at the clock above the stove. Then he looked back through the window. Snow had covered the path to her porch. No fresh prints crossed the yard. He told himself she was tired. She had looked tired the day before. She had coughed and brushed it off. Maybe she had finally done the reasonable thing and slept late. Behind him, Sable lifted her head. The movement was small, but Everett saw it reflected in the dark glass of the kitchen window. Her ears rose. Her body stiffened under the loosened wrap on her injured leg. The puppies shifted, disturbed by the loss of warmth against them. Everett turned. "What is it?" Sable looked past him. Not at the door, not at the stove, not at the sound of the wind pressing against the east wall. Past him, toward the side of the cabin facing Marin's cottage. Everett wiped his hands on a towel and went to the woodroom doorway. Sable's amber eyes were fixed on the wall as if she could see through it. A low sound moved in her throat. Not the defensive growl she used when someone stepped too close. This was thinner, uneasy, almost questioning. "Snowplow?" he asked. No engine answered outside. One of the puppies nosed into her flank. Sable looked down only long enough to nudge it back into the pile. Then she lifted her head again and stared toward Marin's house. Everett listened. The cabin offered ordinary sounds: fire, wind, the faint squeak of a puppy dreaming. Nothing else. He went back to the sink, but his eyes returned to the window. No curtains, no chimney smoke. He set the bottle down. "Marin is allowed to sleep," he said, though he was not sure whether he was speaking to Sable or to himself. Sable pushed herself upright. It was not easy. Her left hind leg shook as she gathered it beneath her. The movement woke 2 puppies. They began to complain, soft and offended, but she did not settle. She stepped once, carefully, then again, until she reached the folded red scarf near the doorway. It had become part of the room now. a familiar object that smelled of Everett and smoke and the first night. One of the pups often slept with its nose pressed into it. Sable caught the edge of the scarf in her teeth and pulled it toward the hall. Everett watched. "Sable!" She dragged it another foot, stopped, and looked at him. That was not a command she had been taught. It was not a trick. It was not magic. It was simply insistence, born from a pattern she had learned. Maren's steps, Maren's voice, Maren's basket, Maren's cough, Maren's hand against the rail. Something in that pattern had broken. Everett felt his body become still in the old way. Not panic. Readiness. He reached for his coat. Sable gave one sharp bark. The puppies startled. Everett stopped with one arm in his sleeve. Sable had not barked like that before. Her warnings had been low, close, controlled. This sound was short and hard, aimed at him like a hand striking a table. He looked at her. "I'm going." She did not move toward the door. She stayed near the puppies, trembling from the effort of standing, eyes still fixed beyond the wall. Everett took his medical kit from the hook beside the mudroom. Outside, the cold hit him clean across the face. Snow came to mid-calf in places. He cut across the yard instead of following the road, moving between the fence line and the stand of spruce that separated his property from Maren's. Behind him, Sable barked once more from inside the cabin. Not frantic, not wild. Enough. Everett looked toward Maren's windows. The curtains were closed. The porch light, which she usually turned off after sunrise, remained on. His pace quickened. Halfway across the yard, he saw the first wrong detail. Maren's basket lay tipped near her front step. Snow had gathered in it, covering the corner of a folded towel. She never left the basket outside, not even for a minute. She said baskets were like people. Leave them in weather long enough, and they lost their shape. Everett climbed the steps and knocked. "Maren?" No answer. He tried the door. It opened under his hand. The cottage smelled of coffee gone bitter on the stove. "Maren," he called again, louder. A faint sound came from the kitchen. Not a word. Not enough to be certain. Everett moved through the narrow hallway, past framed photographs and shelves of books, past a knitted blanket folded over the back of a chair. The kitchen was small and warm, with yellow curtains, white cabinets, and a round table set for one. A ceramic mug lay broken near the chair. A bottle of pills rested on its side beneath the table, the cap beside it. Maren was on the floor beside the chair, one hand pressed near her chest, her face pale, breath shallow and uneven. Everett crossed the room and dropped to his knees. "Maren, it's Everett." Her eyes opened halfway. She tried to speak. The words did not come. "Don't talk." His voice changed immediately, becoming steady in a way he had not used in years. "I'm calling for help." He took out his phone and dialed 911, placing it on speaker while he checked her breathing, her skin, her responsiveness. The dispatcher answered, and Everett gave the address, symptoms, age, and condition in clear phrases. No drama, no wasted words. His hands remembered what his mind did not want to revisit. The operator asked questions. Everett answered. He kept Maren as still and comfortable as he could. He loosened the scarf at her neck. He checked the time. He noted the medication bottle without moving more than necessary. When the dispatcher instructed him through each step, he followed. He did not pretend he knew better. That mattered. Skill was not the same as control. Maren's fingers moved weakly against his wrist. "I'm here," he said. Her eyes shifted toward the window. For one strange second, Everett thought she was looking for the snow. Then he understood. "The dogs are safe," he said. "Sable's with the pups." Maren's eyelids lowered. A distant siren began to rise from the road below. It sounded impossibly far away. Everett stayed beside her and counted breaths, not as a soldier, not as a man trying to conquer the moment, but as a neighbor who had arrived because a wounded mother dog had noticed a missing routine before he had let himself believe it mattered. By the time the ambulance reached the cottage, Deputy Hollis Crane was behind it in his county vehicle, guiding the driver through the narrow snow-cut road. Two paramedics entered with practiced calm. Everett gave them the information he had. Time found, symptoms, medications visible, what he had done, what she had tried to say. They took over, and for once he let them. Hollis stood in the doorway, snow melting on the shoulders of his jacket. "You found her." Everett glanced toward the window facing his cabin. "Sable did." Hollis followed his gaze. From that angle, Everett could see the upper half of his wood-room window through the trees. A white shape stood behind the glass, watching. Hollis said nothing for a moment. Then he took out his notebook. The news traveled faster than the ambulance. By late morning, 3 trucks had slowed near Everett's drive. None stopped. No one seemed sure what to do with the knowledge. The white dog they had called a danger had noticed what no person in town had seen. The woman everyone trusted had been alone on her kitchen floor. Those facts did not arrange themselves comfortably. Everett returned to the cabin after the ambulance left, boots heavy with snow, and his medical kit still open in one hand. Sable was at the woodroom doorway. She had worn herself out getting there. Her injured leg trembled. The puppies cried behind her, disturbed by her absence. But she did not move back until Everett stepped inside. He closed the door. "She's on her way to the hospital," he said. Sable stared at him. "I don't know yet." The answer was for both of them. He guided her back to the bedding, but she turned twice toward the wall facing Marin's cottage before lying down. When she finally settled, the puppies burrowed against her. Pip crawled near her front leg. Sable lowered her muzzle over the small body and closed her eyes, but her ears remained alert. An hour later, Tessa arrived. She knocked softly this time. Everett let her in. She did not bring the yellow clipboard under her arm. It was tucked into her bag, visible but not leading the way. "I heard," she said. "Hollis and dispatch, and half the town by now." Everett nodded. "How is Mrs. Whitaker? They got her there alive." Tessa absorbed that. In the woodroom, Sable lifted her head at the sound of Tessa's voice. She did not growl. Tessa noticed, though she pretended to be looking at the heater screen. "I need to document what happened," Tessa said. "I figured. I'm not here to make it smaller." That made him look at her. Tessa removed the clipboard slowly and set it on the kitchen table instead of holding it like a shield. She took out a pen. "Tell me from the beginning." So Everett did. The closed curtains, the missing path, Sable's behavior, the scarf, the bark, the basket on the porch, the unlocked door, the call, the ambulance. Tessa wrote all of it down. Not once did she say that dogs could not sense such things. Not once did she suggest it was proof of anything beyond what had happened. She simply recorded the behavior. Unusual alerting, directed attention toward neighboring residents, repeated vocalization, no escape attempt, no aggression during event, returned to pups afterward. When she finished, she looked toward Sable. "Positive alerting behavior," she said. Everett leaned back against the counter. "That matter? It belongs in the file." "That's not what I asked." Tessa capped the pen. "It matters. It doesn't erase the precautions. It doesn't answer the genetics question. It doesn't mean people get to walk up and touch her." Her voice softened by a fraction. "But yes, it matters." Outside, a truck slowed near the fence. Boone's truck. He sat there for several seconds, engine running, one hand on the wheel. Everett could see his face through the windshield, unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. Boone did not get out. He did not wave. He only looked toward Marin's cottage, then toward Everett's cabin. Then he drove on. "Still afraid," Everett said. "Maybe," Tessa replied, "or ashamed. Those look similar when a man doesn't know where to put them." That was the kindest thing she had said about Boone yet. By afternoon, Lenora came by to check Sable, and then to check Everett, though she denied the second purpose. Sable was exhausted but stable. Her leg had not worsened. The puppies were unsettled, needing extra feeding because their mother had spent energy she could barely spare. "You cannot let her keep standing every time someone arrives," Lenora said. "She'll set herself back." "I'll reduce traffic." "That includes people with good intentions." Everett nodded. Lenora glanced toward Marin's cottage. "Good intentions will be lined up by supper." She was right. Calls came first. Then bags left at the gate, towels, puppy pads, formula, a pot of stew from the diner, a bundle of soft blankets with a note that read, "For the White family." No signature, no one knocked. For once, Cedar Lark seemed to understand distance as a form of respect. Near sunset, Hollis came up the drive, not in uniform this time, but in a heavy coat, carrying Marin's basket. The snow had been brushed from it. The folded towel inside was damp at one corner, but still usable. "Hospital called the station," he said, from the porch. "She's awake." Everett's hand tightened on the doorframe. "She talking?" "Apparently complaining." "That sounds right." Hollis almost smiled. First thing she asked was whether the dogs were still at your place. Everett looked back toward the woodroom. Sable was awake, her head was raised, and her ears had caught Hollis's voice, though she did not know the words. The puppies slept against her, unaware that the town's opinion of them had shifted by one careful inch. Everett turned back. What did they tell her? That the dogs are safe. The sentence entered the cabin gently and stayed there. After Hollis left, Everett carried Marin's basket inside and set it near the kitchen table. He found a note tucked beneath the towel. The handwriting was Marin's, written before the morning had gone wrong. Everett, do not forget to eat before you become dramatic about being useful. M. He stared at it for a long time. Then he folded the note and placed it beside the logbook. In the woodroom, Sable lowered her head again. Her body curved around the puppies with the same fierce patience she had shown in the forest, but something had changed in the space around her. The cabin no longer held only suspicion, rules, and fragile permission. It held one fact no rumor could easily undo. The dog people feared had called for help, and because she had, Marin Bell Whitaker was alive to ask whether the dogs were safe. The word dangerous stayed in Cedar Lark longer than the fear that had made it useful. People had begun to lower their voices when they said it. That was the first change. A week earlier, the word had been tossed across counters, loading docks, and plow routes with certainty. Dangerous, wolf-blooded, unpredictable, too close to town. After Marin Bell Whitaker was taken to the hospital alive, the word became less comfortable in people's mouths. No one had forgotten their concerns. No one was ready to let Sable roam the street or let children of visitors press faces to the fence. The rules remained. The double latch stayed locked. The visitor line inside Everett's cabin stayed marked in blue painter's tape. Tessa still inspected the property. Dr. Lenora Haskell still checked Sable's leg, hydration, milk supply, and the slow, hopeful weight gain of 8 white pups. But something had shifted. Fear had stopped being the only story available. On the 8th morning after the rescue, Lenora arrived with a scanner wrapped in a towel and a paper cup of coffee balanced badly on top of her medical bag. She came through the door with snow on her shoulders and annoyance on her face. "Your driveway is becoming a civic project," she said. Everett looked up from the logbook. "Boone's crew plowed it." "Yes, too well. Now people think visiting is possible. No visitors. I told 2 men from the lumber yard that unless they were delivering sterile gauze or legal authority, they could admire the dog from their truck." Everett closed the notebook. "How did they take that?" "They left a bag of dog food and fled." From the woodroom, Sable lifted her head at Lenora's voice. She did not growl anymore when Lenora entered, though she watched every movement with the clear opinion that cooperation did not equal surrender. Her white coat had regained some thickness now that it was dry and brushed. The pale crescent behind her left ear showed when the stove light touched it. Her injured leg was still wrapped, but she could stand longer without trembling. The puppies were beginning to look less like fragile snowballs and more like creatures with intentions. Pip, still the smallest, had discovered the edge of the quilt and considered it a mountain worth conquering. The bold yellow-marked pup had taken to sleeping halfway across Sable's foreleg, as if claiming a guard post. One of the quieter pups always turned when Everett entered, tracking the sound of his boots before the others noticed. Lenora washed her hands, warmed them near the stove, and knelt outside Sable's bedding. "Good morning, Sable," she said. "I am about to annoy you for excellent reasons." Sable blinked. "That's consent in her language?" Everett asked. "That is tolerance. In medicine, we often work with less." The examination went smoothly until Lenora moved the scanner along Sable's shoulder and neck. The dog stiffened, not from pain but from the unfamiliar pressure. Everett lowered himself beside her, palm flat on the floor as he had learned to do. Sable looked at his hand, then back at Lenora. The scanner chirped once. Lenora froze. Everett saw it before she spoke. "What?" "Microchip." He leaned closer. "You found one?" "A weak signal, but yes." Lenora adjusted the scanner and passed it again, slower this time. The device chirped again. "Old chip. It may be damaged or migrated. Numbers partial." Everett felt a strange stillness settle in him. Sable was not a rumor now, not a shape in the snow, not merely an unknown animal being held under county conditions. She had belonged somewhere, Someone at some point had recorded her as a life with a number. Lenora wrote the partial sequence on a notepad, then photographed the scanner display. "I'll send this to Tessa and run it through the state registry. Don't expect it to be simple. Nothing about her has been." "No," Lenora said, looking at Sable. "But she keeps answering anyway." Sable lowered her head and drew one wandering pup closer with her muzzle. Everett watched the movement, and the first edge of anger entered quietly. Not loud anger. Not the kind that made a man slam doors or promise things he could not legally do. This was colder, more useful, and more dangerous if left alone. A dog like Sable should not have ended up in a snow hollow with 8 hungry pups and an injured leg. Someone had missed something. Maybe many people had missed many small things. A form, a transport time, a gate, a phone call, a signature no one followed after it was filed. Everett had learned long ago that disaster often arrived not as one terrible choice, but as a line of minor neglects nobody wanted to own. By noon, Tessa was at his kitchen table with Lenora's note, the partial chip number, her yellow clipboard, and a laptop that struggled against the cabin's weak internet. She wore her county parka unzipped, sleeves pushed back, hair pulled tight at the nape of her neck. There were shadows under her eyes. Everett wondered how many hours she had spent reopening files she could have ignored. She did not say she had done it for Sable. That was not Tessa's way. "I found a match," she said. Everett stood across from her, arms folded. Lenora leaned against the counter, glasses low on her nose. Tessa turned the laptop so they could see the screen. The record was old and incomplete, with scanned documents layered under newer transfer notes. Her registered name was Snowvale Sable, Tessa said. White German Shepherd. Female. Enrolled in a nonprofit support program called North Star Working Companions. Everett repeated the name under his breath. North Star. It served veterans and industrial workers with long-term injuries, Tessa continued. Not a law enforcement program, not protection work. Emotional support, mobility support in some cases, structured companionship. Mostly adults living alone or recovering from work-related trauma. Lenora's face tightened. "I remember hearing about them. Small outfit. Good reputation for a while." "For a while," Tessa said. Everett looked toward the wood room. Sable was awake, watching the kitchen through the doorway. "Why was she in the woods?" he asked. Tessa scrolled. "The founder died last fall. Funding collapsed. The board dissolved faster than the transfer process could handle. Dogs were moved to partner shelters, private foster homes, and temporary handlers across 3 counties. That sounds organized. It sounds organized after someone types it into a report. Lenora gave Tessa a sharp glance, as if surprised by the honesty. Tessa clicked another file open. Sable was listed as pregnant at the time of transfer. Everett's jaw set. "She should not have been moved in a storm," Lenora said. "No," Tessa agreed. The word carried more weight because it came from her. Tessa continued. "A volunteer transport left with her during a weather window that apparently closed faster than expected. Main road shut down. Driver took Mill Spur Pass. Vehicle slid off the shoulder near Harrow Creek. No serious human injuries. Driver was picked up by a county unit and transported for evaluation. The report says the dog escaped from a damaged crate." "Escaped," Everett said. Tessa did not look away. "That is the word used. She was pregnant, scared, hurt, and loose in a snowstorm. Yes, and nobody found her." Tessa's mouth tightened. Search was limited by weather. The dog was entered as missing. But the nonprofit was already in receivership, and the transfer paperwork was incomplete. Responsibility became unclear. Everett laughed once, without humor. Responsibility became unclear. It was the kind of phrase that made abandonment sound like fog. Sable stood in the woodroom. The movement drew all 3 of them silent. She did not come forward. She was not allowed beyond the line, and somehow she had learned that boundary better than some people. She stood with her injured leg held lightly off the floor, her ears high, 8 pups shifting behind her. Everett looked at her and imagined the broken crate, the cold road, the storm closing around her. He imagined her heavy with pups, running not because she understood paperwork, but because every sound behind her had become threat. He imagined her finding the rock shelf and making a nursery out of snow and stubborn will. His anger sharpened. "I want names," he said. Lenora's eyes moved to him. Tessa closed the laptop halfway. "Everett. names, the transport coordinator, the receiver, whoever signed off on moving her. That may come, but if you go looking for one person to carry this whole thing, you'll miss what actually happened. What happened is she was failed. Yes, Tessa said, by more than one person. By a program that collapsed, by forms that didn't follow animals, by weather, by a system that depends on volunteers and then acts surprised when volunteers get overwhelmed. That's supposed to make it better? No. Her voice remained steady. It is supposed to tell us where to work. The room held that line for a long moment. Everett wanted a door to kick open, not literally. He was too old for that kind of useless theater. But something in him wanted a clean target, a villain whose removal could make the story morally tidy. Sable deserved that kind of clarity. The puppies deserved it. Marin, lying in a hospital room because she had given help until her own body demanded attention, deserved it. But the documents on Tessa's screen offered no single monster. Only a chain, a tired driver, a dead founder, empty funds, bad timing, missing signatures, agencies working beside each other without quite touching hands. Lenora stepped closer to the table. There may be other dogs. Tessa nodded once. That is why I started calling neighboring counties before I came here. Everett looked at her. She took another sheet from her folder. North Star transferred 11 dogs in the last 6 months. 4 confirmed placements. 2 currently in county shelters under different names. 3 records incomplete. Sable was listed missing. 1 is unaccounted for. Lenora exhaled slowly. Everett stared at the list. There it was, the larger shape. Sable had not been an accident in isolation. She was one white thread pulled loose from a garment already coming apart. "What do you need?" he asked. Tessa blinked once, as if the question had not been the one she expected. "I need access to the old North Star transfer files. I need Dr. Haskell to document medical condition and likely stress risk for animals moved improperly. I need Hollis to help verify the transport report. I need the county attorney to decide whether any civil or administrative action applies. And I need you not to turn this into a one-man crusade." Everett looked at Sable. The dog watched him back. "Fine," he said. Tessa did not soften. "I mean it. I heard you. No, you heard the part you liked." She folded her hands on the clipboard. "If you make this about anger, the county will close ranks around procedure. If we make it about correcting records, locating animals, and building a better temporary hold process, we may actually save something." Everett said nothing. Lenora crossed her arms. "She is right. I didn't say she wasn't. You were thinking loudly." That would have annoyed him more if it had not been accurate. Outside, a truck pulled into the drive. Not county. Not Lenora's. Everett recognized the engine before he saw it. Boone. The sawmill foreman parked near the fence and sat in the cab for a while, as he had after Marin's emergency. This time he got out. He wore his lined denim jacket, heavy gloves, and a cap pulled low. A roll of hardware cloth sat in the truck bed beside 2 bags of wood shavings. Everett stepped onto the porch. Boone stopped at the gate. He did not look toward the woodroom window. "Brought material," Boone said. "I didn't ask. Figured you'd say that. You still worried?" Boone's jaw shifted under his mustache. Yes, the honesty surprised Everett. Boone looked toward the cabin then, not directly at Sable, but at the room that held her. "Doesn't mean I want pups crawling through snow because I was too proud to help build a proper run." Everett came down the steps. Boone lifted the roll of hardware cloth from the truck bed. "Also, Lydia from the diner says you're not picking up food when she sends it. I don't need the whole town feeding me. The whole town disagrees. I'm not helpless. No." Boone looked at him then. "But you're busy. There's a difference." For a moment, Everett had no answer. Boone carried the supplies to the side fence and began measuring without being asked. He took the yellow carpenter's pencil from behind his ear and marked the rail. The pencil moved with practiced certainty. Cut here. Staple there. Fold the lower edge outward so no pup could dig under once they were old enough to try. Tessa came onto the porch behind Everett and watched Boone work. "I didn't authorize modification to the containment plan," she said. Boone did not turn around. "Then authorize it while I'm doing it right." Lenora, from inside, called, "That is the most Boone sentence ever spoken." Tessa looked as if she wanted to object. Instead, she walked down to inspect the materials. "Lower edge needs to be secured every 6 inches. 4, Boone said. "That's acceptable." Generous of you." Everett stood back and watched them argue about spacing, fasteners, and snow load, as if the fate of the town rested on wire tension. In a way, it did. Not because the fence itself would solve everything, but because people who had feared Sable were beginning to put labor between fear and action. By late afternoon, 3 more people had come without stepping near the cabin. A mechanic named Della Hume, compact and brisk under a grease-stained parka, installed a better latch on the inner gate, and left before Everett could offer money. A diner worker dropped off covered meals, labeled with reheating instructions. Hollis came by with photocopies of the transport report, and a promise to check the old road incident records. No one called Sable a wolf. No one called her safe either. They simply worked. That was enough for the day. Near sunset, Hollis returned, this time driving slowly behind a hospital transport van that turned carefully into Marin's lane. Everett stepped onto the porch before he knew he had moved. Tessa and Boone stopped at the fence. Lenora came to the kitchen window. Marin was coming home. The van door opened, and a hospital aide helped her down. She looked smaller than before, wrapped in a beige coat with her plum scarf tucked carefully at her throat. One hand rested on the aide's arm. The other lifted weakly when she saw the people near Everett's cabin. "Don't all stand there looking tragic," she called across the snow. Her voice was thinner, but still hers. Boone turned away quickly, pretending to inspect the latch. Everett walked halfway to the road and stopped at the boundary of his property. He wanted to go farther, but Marin was being guided carefully, and a crowd would only make the moment heavier. "How are you?" he asked. "Annoyed," she said. "That is a good sign." The aide smiled. Then Marin looked past him, at the cabin window. Sable stood behind the reinforced fence line, just outside the open wood room door, where Everett had allowed her a few supervised steps in the cold air. Her white coat shone against the darker timber wall. The pups crowded near the threshold behind her, 8 small white faces peering around her legs, too young to understand why every human had gone still. Sable did not bark. She did not strain toward Marin. She stood quietly, ears high, eyes fixed on the old woman. Marin lifted one hand. "Hello, brave girl," she said. The words carried clearly across the snow. Sable lowered her head by a fraction. Not submission, not performance, acknowledgement. Around the yard, no one spoke. Boone's pencil had stopped moving in his hand. Tessa stood with her clipboard lowered at her side. Hollis watched from beside the van. Lenora wiped at her glasses, though they were not fogged. For the first time, the people of Cedar Lark saw the white dog not as a problem awaiting classification, not as a rumor wrapped in fur, not as a possible threat waiting for proof. They saw a mother standing with her young. They saw a living creature who had survived a chain of human mistakes, and still recognized a neighbor worth calling for. Marin was helped toward her cottage. Before going inside, she turned back once more. "Everett," she said. "Yes?" "Make sure she gets extra broth." He nodded. "And you eat something that was not poured from a thermos." Boone muttered, "Here, here." Marin pointed at him without looking. "I heard that." The old woman disappeared into her house, and the door closed gently behind her. Even after the van left and the light began to fade, no one moved right away. The snow around the cabin held tracks from county boots, work boots, hospital shoes, and Sable's careful paw marks inside the fence. Separate paths crossing one another, a map of reluctant care. Everett looked at the scene and understood that the truth had done more than clear Sable's name. It had revealed how easily a town could mistake confusion for danger, and how much quieter repair looked when nobody was trying to win. Behind him, Sable turned back toward her puppies. This time, when Boone walked past the fence carrying his tools, she watched him but did not growl. Boone noticed. He did not smile. Not exactly. But he set one unopened bag of wood shavings closer to the gate and said, gruffly, "For the pups." Then he left it there and walked away. Spring did not arrive in Cedar Lark all at once. It came cautiously in narrow signs that a man might miss if he was waiting for something dramatic. Snow softened first along the south side of roofs. The old rail spur appeared in broken black lines beneath the thaw. At the mill yard, stacks of timber shed their white caps one plank at a time. Water began to tick from gutters during the brightest hours of the afternoon, then froze again by evening as if winter had changed its mind. At Everett's cabin, spring arrived on 8 unsteady sets of paws. The puppies were no longer helpless bundles tucked against Sable's ribs. They had grown into bright, clumsy young shepherds with white coats, black noses, oversized feet, and the kind of curiosity that turned every object into either a toy, a mountain, or a mystery. Pip remained the smallest, but no longer looked fragile. The red yarn near his feeding spot had been replaced by a soft collar, and he had developed the stubborn habit of dragging towels twice his size across the floor. Marlowe, the green-collared pup, never crossed the room without looking back for whoever had been left behind. Briar, marked in mustard yellow, stationed himself near doors as if the cabin had hired him. Nell, in soft purple, had a gift for finding the quietest person in any room and falling asleep against that person's boot. Orrin, blue-collared and bold, believed every bucket had been placed in the world for inspection. Fable still startled when wind pushed at the eaves, but recovered faster if Sable was near. Quill watched before moving, amber eyes thoughtful beneath half-raised ears. Rue, bright in orange, was always first to greet a familiar voice. They were all white. Against the pine walls and dark quilts of Everett's cabin, they looked like pieces of the last snow refusing to melt. Sable had healed more slowly than they had grown. Her left hind leg would probably never be as strong as it once was. Lenora had said so without softening the truth, because truth was one of the ways she showed respect. Sable could walk now. She could stand at the fence and watch the road. She could climb the porch steps if Everett did not rush her. But when the weather turned sharp, or she had spent too much time on her feet, her gait shortened, and the old injury showed in the careful way she placed that leg. She remained alert, but the sharpness in her had changed shape. It was no longer the desperate vigilance of a mother in a frozen hollow. It was the watchfulness of a creature who had learned that not every approaching sound meant loss. When Marin's footsteps came along the road, Sable lifted her head but did not brace. When Lenora entered with her medical bag, Sable sighed as if accepting an unpleasant civic duty. When Tessa came for inspections, Sable watched the yellow clipboard more suspiciously than the woman holding it. Everett understood that. He had come to respect the clipboard too, but he did not like it either. The temporary hold had become a care agreement. The care agreement had become a placement plan. Tessa had finished the paperwork with her usual lack of ceremony, standing at Everett's kitchen table, while 2 puppies tried to untie her bootlaces. "The county recognizes that Sable is not classified as a wolf hybrid," she said, reading from the final form. "Genetic screening and veterinary assessment support white German Shepherd identification. Due to history of stress response, medical recovery, and bonded maternal behavior, permanent placement with Mr. Everett Calder-Voss is approved under standard follow-up conditions." Everett looked up. "Permanent?" Tessa lowered the paper. "That is what the word means." 1 puppy sneezed against her boot. She looked down. "For Sable." Not all 8 pups. The room changed around that sentence. Everett had known it was coming. Lenora had been warning him for weeks. Marin had said it more gently, usually while pouring coffee on the porch. Love is not measured by how much you can keep in one house. Even Boone had muttered once that 8 growing shepherds would eat Everett out of winter before summer. Knowing did not make the decision easier. The cabin had been quiet for years. Too quiet, though Everett had never admitted that before. The puppies had ruined that quiet thoroughly. They had dragged socks under chairs, tipped over an empty kindling basket, fallen asleep in his boot tray, and woken him at impossible hours with needs that did not care whether a man had slept. He had thought at first that the noise would wear him down. Instead, it had given shape to the mornings. Now he had to choose homes for them, not shelters, not vague good intentions. Homes. The applications came in after Tessa announced the process at the town hall, and Lenora made it clear that no one would receive a puppy simply because they felt moved by the story. Applicants had to visit more than once. They had to help clean bedding, learn feeding history, understand veterinary schedules, and sit quietly near Sable without expecting affection. They had to agree that a beautiful white puppy would become a large, intelligent dog requiring patience, structure, space, and time. Some people lost interest. That was useful. The ones who stayed began to matter. Boone came first, though he took 3 visits to say it directly. He stood outside the fence one evening with his yellow carpenter's pencil tucked behind his ear and watched Briar sit by the gate, serious as a foreman. "That one thinks he's working security," Boone said. "He thinks everything is his post," Everett replied. Boone rubbed the scar on his forearm without seeming to notice. "My house is quiet since Ruth passed." Everett did not speak. Boone cleared his throat. "Not saying I need noise. No. Just saying a gate dog with opinions might not be the worst thing." Briar chose that moment to bark at a drifting leaf, then fall backward over his own paws. Boone stared at him. Everett said, "Strong opinions. Limited experience." For the first time since the meeting weeks before, Boone laughed without hiding it. Della Hume, the mechanic who worked night shifts at the snow equipment garage, came for Orrin. She was compact, quick-handed, and smelled faintly of motor oil, no matter how thoroughly she washed. Orrin followed her tool bag as if the wrenches inside were living creatures. Della sat cross-legged outside the visitor line and let him investigate the toe of her boot for 20 minutes. "I don't want a dog who sits pretty," she said. "I want one who can handle a workshop and still come home gentle." Lenora approved her on the spot, though she pretended to need more paperwork. Hollis Crane helped match Marlowe with Wade Larkin, a widowed plow driver who lived at the far end of Millspur Road. Wade was 60, soft-spoken, and used to winter mornings that began before anyone else's lights came on. Marlowe followed him to the fence, then turned back to check whether Pip was coming. Wade watched that and nodded once. "That one remembers the rear," he said. Everett understood why Hollis had brought him. Nell went to Lydia Ramos from the diner, a woman in her 50s whose apron pockets always held receipts, peppermint candies, and folded notes from people who owed her nothing but told her everything. She had spent years caring for her mother before the older woman passed, and she had the tired kindness of someone who knew the difference between being needed and being seen. Nell slept against her shoe during the second visit, and refused to move when Lydia stood. "Well," Lydia said, wiping her eyes with the back of her wrist, "I suppose that is an opinion. Each placement hurt in a different place." Everett did not show it much. He signed forms. He reviewed schedules. He packed starter blankets carrying Sable's scent. He wrote feeding notes in careful print and added the veterinary contact to each folder. He told every adopter the same thing: no rushing, no showing off, no treating them like symbols. "They are not a story you get to own," he said once, more sharply than he meant to. Marin, sitting on the porch in her beige coat, answered before anyone else could. "No," she said. "They are lives we get to honor." The words found the center of what Everett had been trying to protect. By then, Marin was stronger. Not as strong as she pretended, but stronger. She came to the cabin most mornings with coffee instead of heavy baskets. She sat in the same chair on the porch and let the puppies approach, one at a time. Sable had begun to lie near the steps when Marin visited, close enough to watch her breathe, far enough not to crowd. One afternoon, Everett found Marin looking at Sable instead of the mountains. "She knows when I'm tired," Marin said. "She watches everybody. No, she watches me differently." Everett leaned against the porch post. Marin smiled without looking at him. "Do not make that worried face. I don't have a worried face. You have several. That one is the one you use when you are deciding whether to fix something no one asked you to repair." He said nothing because she was, as usual, too accurate. Sable lifted her head and looked between them. For a moment, the three of them sat in the mild winter sun. A man who had kept his life narrow, an old woman who had nearly run out of mornings, and a white dog who had been called dangerous until she saved the person everyone loved. The adoption day was set for a Saturday, after the last official cold warning of the season. It was not an event at first. Everett had insisted on that. No banners, no speeches, no visitors crowding the pups. But Cedar Lark had a way of turning practical work into community without naming it celebration. Someone decided the snow-damaged benches at the small commons near the old rail spur needed repair. Someone else brought tools. Lydia brought coffee and biscuits. Boone brought lumber. Della brought a portable heater and 3 extension cords. Tessa brought paperwork in a weatherproof folder and tried not to look pleased when everything ran on schedule. By 10 in the morning, half the town seemed to be fixing something. The commons had been neglected for years, a small open yard between the community hall and the old mill office. Snow had bent the railing near the steps. The signboard leaned. The gravel path had washed out in places. It had nothing directly to do with Sable or the puppies, which was why Everett liked it. The day was not about turning them into a spectacle. It was about repairing the place that had almost refused them. One by one, the adopters arrived. Each pup wore a simple collar and carried the scent of the cabin on a small folded blanket. Sable came too, moving slowly beside Everett on a loose lead. That detail had taken work. Weeks earlier, the sight of a lead had made her body lock with dread. Everett and Lenora had practiced gently, never forcing, until Sable understood that the lead did not mean separation. It meant they were moving together. At the edge of the commons, people went quiet. Everett felt the old discomfort rise in him. Too many eyes. Too many feelings waiting for a place to land. Then Marin stepped beside him and said, "Keep walking." So he did. Sable stood near the repaired signboard while the puppies, one at a time, were handed into the arms of the adults who had earned them through patience. There were tears, though no one made a performance of them. Boone took Briar with both hands and held him awkwardly at first until the pup licked his mustache. Della laughed when Orrin tried to climb into her tool bag. Wade Larkin lowered himself to one knee so Marlowe could press a paw against his coat. Lydia tucked Nell's blanket close and whispered something only the pup heard. Pip was last. Everett had delayed that one without admitting it. Pip was going to Marin, not full-time in the ordinary sense. Lenora and Tessa had agreed on a shared arrangement because Marin's health required caution. Pip would sleep at Everett's cabin at first and spend days with Marin as she recovered, with the long-term plan adjusted slowly. It was the kind of solution that would have sounded too complicated to Everett months ago. Now it sounded like care. Marin sat on the bench Boone had repaired that morning. Everett placed Pip in her lap. The small, red-collared pup turned twice, then settled against the fold of her coat as if he had been born with that destination in mind. Sable watched. Her ears were high, but her body remained calm. She did not pull toward Pip. She did not cry. She simply looked at Marin, then at Everett. Letting go, Everett realized, did not always mean losing. Sometimes it meant trusting the circle had become wide enough. Tessa approached with the final folder. All placements are recorded. Follow-up visits scheduled. Sable's care conditions remain in place. Everett took the papers. "Thank you," he said. Tessa studied him, perhaps searching for sarcasm and not finding it. "You did the work," she said. "I documented it. That matters." "Yes," she replied. "It does." Boone appeared at the gate near the commons, with a small wooden sign tucked under one arm. The letters were burned in by hand, uneven but careful. "Go slow. Family healing." Everett looked at him. Boone shrugged. "Had scrap." Marin laughed so suddenly that Pip woke in her lap. The sign went on to the fence at Everett's cabin that afternoon. As the sun lowered, the adopters returned with the puppies for one final walk through the snow before taking them home. The 8 white pups tumbled across the commons in a loose, joyful scatter. They chased one another around repaired benches, slipped on packed snow, and discovered that every boot belonged to a potential friend. Yet whenever Sable stopped, each pup eventually turned back. Not all at once, not perfectly, but one by one they checked for her. Sable stood beside Everett, white coat bright against the dark shape of the old mill behind her. Her injured leg was planted carefully. Her amber eyes moved over the pups, the people, the repaired yard, the town that had once wanted distance and now stood close without crowding. No one called her Wolf, not with fear. Someone near the coffee table said softly, "There's the White Guardian." The name traveled without being announced, not as an official title, not as a legend, just as something that fit well enough for people to keep. The White Guardian of the mill town. Everett heard it and looked down at Sable. She did not know what they called her. She did not care about being forgiven by people who had feared her. She cared about the 8 pups, the old woman on the bench, the man beside her, the fence, the road, the direction of the wind, and whether the space around her family remained safe. That was enough. The last light caught the snow, turning the commons bright and gold. Marin sat with Pip asleep in her lap. Boone stood nearby with Briar under one arm, pretending the pup was heavier than he was. Tessa checked a form against her folder, while Rue tried to chew the corner. Lenora watched Sable with the quiet satisfaction of someone who trusted slow healing more than miracles. Everett stood in the middle of it all, and understood that his cabin would not be quiet in the same way again. Even after the puppies went to their homes, even after the tracks in the snow filled in, even after winter ended, the silence he had kept for years had been broken, not by noise but by need. And somehow, by answering it, he had not lost the life he knew. He had made room for a larger one. Sable leaned lightly against his leg. Everett rested one hand on the white fur at her shoulder. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Sable looked once toward her pups, then toward the road to the cabin. Slowly, with the whole town behind them and the new sign waiting at the gate, they began to walk. Sometimes healing does not arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes through a quiet act of care, a neighbor who notices, a tired hand that still reaches out, or a frightened creature finally given enough patience to become gentle again. Sable's story reminds us that what looks dangerous from a distance may simply be wounded, afraid, and waiting for someone brave enough to look closer. And maybe grace often works that way too. Not always as a great miracle, but as one small mercy arriving at the right time. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about a person, an animal, or a quiet moment that helped you believe in kindness again. And if you want more stories of loyalty, hope, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel. May your home be filled with peace, and may you never miss the small mercies waiting at your door.